On today's show, we're talking about three polarizing Mets who are entering a make or break year in 2025.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, I've had this topic for today's show on my list of show ideas for a little bit now. The original title, Three Mets Who Will Change Narratives in 2025. And then it sort of got adjusted as I was working out this idea today to make it guys who might have one last chance. And so one of the names that I was going to talk about in this type of an episode was Kodai Senga. But I don't think there was much to discuss there because the only narrative with Senga is the fact that he might not be healthy. And we're not going to really know that until he just goes out and does it. Instead, I want to talk about guys that are very polarizing with Mets fans because either you still are holding out hope that they're going to be impact players or you're ready to give up on them. So that's where we get to guys who are entering maybe their last chance to be real, long-term pieces or just impact players on this roster. And we're going to open things up with the guy that took the ball against the Houston Astros on Tuesday, and that's Tylor Megill. Tylor Megill is entering year 5, and he is perpetually stuck in that depth starter role. He has yet to establish himself as a clear-cut, no doubt about it, pencil him into your starting rotation big league starter. It's been a combination of the Mets always adding, but also Megill being wildly inconsistent up to this point throughout his career. And now you're looking at his future, and 2026, the Mets are still going to have guys like Clay Holmes, Kodai Senga, Sean Manaea, maybe even Frankie Montas that are on big league contracts. David Peterson isn't going anywhere. And you look at the top prospects, we saw some glimpses of Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell. You got, Jonah Tong and Noel McLean, who are in Double-A and very well could be entering the fold by 2026. Christian Scott just started to throw a baseball again in his recovery off of Tommy John surgery. He's expected to be part of that mix next year. So as you sort of look at that outlook, where will Tylor Megill fit into the picture, especially because this is his last year with an option? So, there is a real chance that come December, Tylor Megill might be a non-tender candidate if things don't go well this year. Now, so far, so good this spring. He had another great outing on Tuesday going up against a legit Astros lineup. You saw Jose Altuve on top of it, Isaac Paredes, Yordan Alvarez, Yainer Diaz. All those guys will be starters this year. Zach DeZenzo is one of their top prospects who could get the first base job with Christian Walker out to start the year. Jamie Pena, their starting shortstop. Brendan Rodgers might be their starting second baseman with Altuve shifting onto left. Chas McCormick will definitely be getting plenty of reps in center field. Mauricio Dubon, their utility man. So you're looking at 9 big league hitters in this lineup. And Megill went 4 innings, allowed 2 hits, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts, no runs. First inning, he struck out Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez. Those are a couple of big names to set down. Second inning, he worked on a double by DeZenzo, picked up another strikeout on Jeremy Pena. Third inning, struck out Chas McCormick, gave up a base hit, but then erased it with a double play ball. Fourth inning, leadoff walk, got a line out, then a strike him out, throw him out, double play. And I will give a little side note here to the catcher that threw out that runner, Hayden Sanger. He looks really good defensively. We knew that. I had a thought today that makes me actually think Sanger might be the guy that has the inside track to this backup catcher job. And the only reason I say that is because Hayden Sanger, from a 40-man roster perspective, could be a really nice addition because you'd have all of his options at your disposal. He's a guy that could just sit on your 40-man roster as the third catcher for potentially years. So who knows? Maybe this is Sanger's opportunity, but that's obviously not the big story of the day. Sanger's not really a polarizing Met in a make-or-break situation. Tylor Megill is. And so now he's had 2 strong spring starts. I'm sure he'll get a couple more. And if this is really an open competition, he's beating Paul Blackburn right now for a rotation spot. We don't know how the Mets plan to align their rotation, to start the season. Eventually, they're going to get to a 6-man rotation, but they have enough off days early in the year to go with a 5-man and have one of their starters as a long relief option in the bullpen. They could piggyback guys until they need that 6-starter spot. We really don't know how they're going to do it. And if they wanted to, if they were aiming to have as many relievers as possible, they could send Megill down because he has that option. And they could roll with Canning and Blackburn just because they don't have options. And it would be a pretty rough outcome for Megill, even if he does outperform those guys. But the way he's pitching, I think the Mets are going to look at this and say, you know what? This is a guy that we can't justify not being one of our 13 pitchers that breaks camp, because he's going to be a really good option to get outs for us. And so I think he does make this team. And this is a pivotal year for him, because you actually look at what he did last year. There was a lot to like. Career high strikeout per 9 of 10.5. You look at his ERA, 4.04, best ERA of his career. Look at his home run per 9, first time it was ever under 1 at 0.92. So he kept the ball in the yard, got a lot of strikeouts, and his ERA was pretty manageable. If you told me this year that Megill was going to pitch to a 4.04 ERA again, sign me up. Now, when it came to the postseason, he got knocked around in a couple appearances, and it was clear that when you got to that stage, you really didn't trust him to pitch in those big moments. But if we're just looking at Megill's makeup and what he has to offer, there is a quality pitcher in there, and that's what has made him frustrating. That's what has made him polarizing, because you can see the vision. Let's talk about a couple of guys here. Yesterday's show, I was discussing Griffin Canning, our jersey bet for the 2025 season. If you know, you know. Griffin Canning is 6'2". He's got a sort of weird short stride delivery, so he only gets about 6'1" of extension. So when we're talking about coming to the plate, he's more comfortable at bat for a hitter. Then you look at Megill. He's 6'7", gets 7 feet 4 inches of extension. That is right atop Major League Baseball. Few guys can shorten that distance from the rubber to the plate like Megill. Canning sits 93. Tylor Megill sits 96. So if we're just talking about pure stuff, you can't tell me that Tylor Megill does not have better stuff than Griffin Canning. You can't tell me that Tylor Megill doesn't have better stuff than Paul Blackburn. And yes, at some point you're going to get McNeil back. You're going to get Montas back. But you're one setback away or one other injury from another guy away from still needing another guy in that rotation, even when you get those two guys back. And actually, even when you do, you're going to need a 6th starter, right? Because if we're going to say Holmes, Peterson, and Senga are locked into this rotation, barring health, Montas, McNeil, that's 5 starters. There was always that competition for a 6th starter spot. And if Tylor Megill gets some early season opportunities and is rocking a 3.5 ERA through the first 2 months of the season, and Blackburn and Canning are over 5, who's going to stay in that spot? Tylor Megill. Now, I look at Megill and I see this deep bag of pitches. I don't know how to feel about it, because on one hand, you could say, man, he could keep hitters off balance. He's got like 9 different pitches. Last year, he registered 8 different pitches, and there's still more that he's toying with, right? Oh, I got a couple different variations of changeups and all these different fastballs and a cutter and a sweeper, a slider, a curveball, a split. But I'm also toying with, or actually it's called the Great American Sport. It's a splitter, and then we got a fork, and there's different, there's so many different pitches. And here's the issue with that. If you're a guy that has 8, 9 pitches, sometimes that means that you don't have 4. And that's what you need to be a good starting pitcher. You need 4 good pitches. Yeah, you can add some taste breakers. There are guys that have a 5-pitch mix. I mean, Seth Lugo has a bunch of pitches. It can work. And maybe Megill is one of those guys that does like to have all these different options. But to me, he has to hone in on what his bread and butter is. And I think the big revelation at the end of last season was the 2-seam, which we might call it the Jeremy Hefner special at this point, because he is trying to get everyone to have a sinker, a nice 2-seam to pair with their 4-seam. And I love that. I really do. Because, against lefties, It gives you an option that's going to, break away from them a little bit. Against Ray is a pitch you can throw in on their hands, get those ground balls. You look at what Tylor Megill has always had. It has always been about the fastball. And when he came up, he was a 3-pitch pitcher. It was fastball, slider, change. At the time, really, he was able to get through the minor leagues at one point with mostly fastballs. He was able to just blow fastballs by people, and that was it, because he does have that large frame, gets the great extension, and throws the ball hard. But having another variation of his fastball is such a smart way to focus on what you are best at. So if he can just get to a point where he is locating his 4-seam and his 2-seam, and then another variation of a fastball, his split, all of a sudden, and obviously a split is an off-speed pitch, but you throw it like a fastball. It's just a different grip. Now you got right there a bunch of pitches that should gear towards your strength. If you're Tylor Megill, the split's going to give you a great option against lefties. The 4-seam and the 2-seam pitches you can throw in any count to any batter. And then he just has to find one breaker that he likes. I know he's got a slider, a sweeper, a curveball. Find the best one. And find the best two, if anything. But if he gets to a point where he really hones in on his arsenal, and even if he does have 8 registered pitches this year, I want to see, the fastball he's going to throw about 50% of the time. Maybe it's 40% 4-seam, and maybe now it's 20% 2-seam. So maybe you can, with the additional fastball, maybe you can get your fastball usage up a little bit overall. And then I want to see a couple of those pitches that he is throwing at least 15% of the time, up to 20% of the time, where you have a couple of other pitches that become bread and butter pitches for you that you can go to and feel confident that you're going to be able to attack the zone or work outside the zone and get those swing and misses. Because I think the biggest thing that we've seen from Tylor Megill throughout his career, it's falling behind hitters, and then it's also a struggle to put guys away. And so if he can figure out which pitches can really put guys away, and if he can have the confidence to stay in the zone and not fall behind in counts, he's going to start pitching deeper into games, and he has the stuff he always has. So I look at Tylor Megill in this upcoming season, and it is a make or break year for him. There's no doubt about it. But I would actually bet on him to be the best of those back end options. I'm not saying he's going to all of a sudden ascend to being an all-star. But can Tylor Megill outpitch Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning and hold on to a rotation spot wire to wire? That would be a huge win for him and also for the Mets, because for one, you're obviously getting great production, but you're getting a guy who would still be in your rotation mix for 2 more years on the cheap. It just gives you more room to play with when it comes to dealing your prospects, putting them into bullpen roles, whatever it is. It just puts you in such a great spot. So Tylor Megill, definitely a guy that's entering a make or break year. And I bet on him to make, as I'm going to with the other 2 guys we're talking about on today's show. Next up, we talked about him a lot, a guy that could be getting a backup spot in this infield. Talking Brett Baty in just a minute. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1-ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell varieties. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack. This is actually my wife's bag. She likes the lightly salted ones. I'm a honey roasted guy, but there are so many flavors to choose from the chili roasted, or if you are a fan of cracking open every nut, there is the in-shell varieties that you can find that are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. Get snackin' and crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. Got a little over 2 weeks left, and we still need 500 more subscribers. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about Brett Baty throughout this offseason and certainly throughout spring training, but here we are again, because if we're going to do a show about guys who are in a make or break year, there's probably no one that fits that narrative more than Brett Baty. Brett Baty, 25 years old, entering his now third crack at being a big contributor for this team. First made his debut in 2022. At the end of that season, he had a great year in 2022, homered in his first big league at bat, but then he was the thumb injury that cost him the end of that season, cost him an opportunity to maybe be an impact player when he was at his best for a really good Mets team. 2023 gets the keys to third base, completely flopped. Last year, again got the keys to third base, got off to a good start. What was it, a hamstring injury that he had that didn't put him on the IL, but after that, he just did not hit. And I'm not blaming the injury for it. It's just that's how the season sort of progressed. Mark Vientos came up and grabbed that starting third base job, and he's not letting it go at this point until Pete Alonso is no longer a Met. If we ever get to that stage, Mark Vientos is your starting third baseman. So Brett Baty is now in that utility role conversation, and he's competing with Luisangel Acuna for a spot on the opening day roster. I've long said on this show that Baty is going to grab that spot because, for one, I said he was best suited to go out and put up big numbers in spring training. So far, you're looking at how many games played this spring. Up to 11 games played. He's hitting 370, 433 on base, 667 slug, 2 home runs, 2 doubles, 5 RBIs, 3 walks to 4 strikeouts. Picked up a stolen base today. Got an OPS at 1100. He's doing it. And you, again, are hearing Carlos Mendoza talking about what the Mets need in that utility infielder role. Do you need a shortstop? He said, well, we just need someone who can finish a game, who can finish a blowout, or, if Francisco Lindor absolutely needed a day, I guess you might need somebody. But Lindor has said time and again, he wants to post every day. So the Mets don't really need a backup shortstop, as I've talked about on this show. Jeff McNeil can be the backup shortstop. Brett Baty can be the backup shortstop, because really all it entails is, hey, if it's 12-1 Mets in the 7th inning, go out there and field any balls hit to you for 3 innings. I think either of those guys can do that. But as we talk about why this is a make or break year for Brett Baty, look at what's coming behind him. Acuna, he's battling out with right now, and Acuna is better suited to be that utility man long-term, right? He's the guy that can play second, short, third, center. Obviously, if you go play center, they can stick you in a corner outfield spot too, and you can hold their own. He can play everywhere, and he brings speed to your bench. He makes sense as that bench utility guy. The only thing is, you still have hopes that he can be your starting second baseman. And for Acuna, it makes a lot of sense to let him play every single day down in AAA, to continue to develop as a hitter, so that when the opportunity arises, whether it's like last year and hopefully nothing happens, but if something does to your shortstop, Acuna is your backup. He's the guy. I mean, even if he's in Syracuse, he's really your backup shortstop. But also, if Jeff McNeil doesn't hit, if Brett Baty's not hitting, if center field, you're getting no production, Acuna is a guy you can call on. So it makes sense to have Acuna develop in the minor leagues, but he's going to be a big leaguer soon. Ronnie Mauricio, we haven't seen him in spring yet. He's obviously not going to break camp. He's going to be in Syracuse to start the year, but he's got more options. He is younger, and he's got upside that we've yet to see realized because he hasn't been able to get those big league opportunities. If Baty doesn't do it this year and you're again looking for a utility guy or whatever it is in 2026, Mauricio is going to get those nods next, because you feel like Baty has exhausted all of those options. Beyond them, you have Jet Williams, who's going to be a player for the Mets, if not midway through this year, by 2026. He could play second base. He could be in center. We still don't know, but he certainly is going to factor into this equation. So as you talk about all these different young players who are entering the fray when it comes to your infield, this might be Brett Baty's last chance to have a real runway to play. And so far, so good in spring. but he's got to do it against big league pitchers on the real big stage. I don't care in the grand scheme of things what Brett Baty does in the Grapefruit League. I have said that his Grapefruit League performance is going to lead to a roster spot. It doesn't mean that I'm 100% buying in that the Grapefruit League is necessarily going to lead to big league success. I've always been on Brett Baty Island because I don't think that he was a top 30 prospect in baseball for nothing. I think there is a ton of potential with him. I think he's a great athlete. I still think he can figure it out, but we got to figure out, is this a mental thing for Brett Baty? Is there some hurdle that he can't get past when he is actually playing Major League Baseball games, during a regular season that he'll just never get over, particularly in a big market with the New York Mets? Or is this the season where Brett Baty is going to continue to force himself into the lineup? Because if Brett Baty hits, all of a sudden you might see a little bit of less playing time for Jeff McNeil at second. You might see Mark Vientos getting a couple more DH days a week because, hey, Baty's going to start at third and, maybe Winker's not swinging a hot bat. All of these different things can happen throughout a season. Maybe Nimmo's not on the roster to start the year, and so you decide, we're going to stick Winker in left, Vientos at DH, and Baty at third. There are going to be opportunities for Brett Baty early this season, and if he can grab onto them, it could completely change his outlook. Because if Brett Baty proves to be a solid hitter in the big leagues who can play plus defense at third base, all of a sudden you might be having a completely different conversation if Pete Alonso opts out of his contract, where all of a sudden you might say, you know what, Mark Vientos and Brett Baty might be the corner infielders of the future. You never know, but this is that final chance, really, it feels like, for Brett Baty to establish himself as a long-term piece for the New York Mets. Otherwise, he's a change of scenery candidate that is either going to get dumped in a trade somewhere, or you never know. I don't know if they would flatly non-tender this guy at the end of the season. I think that's still doubtful, but yeah, he's a guy that is definitely running out of chances for the New York Mets, and it is a big year for Brett Baty to prove what he's got. We have one more player that is entering a make or break year to change the narrative for himself in 2025. We'll talk about that player in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies you need from the site that's made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with your order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. If you are a trade pro looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. If you are an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Last guy to talk about for the show today is Jeff McNeil. Now, if you want to talk about a polarizing player, there might not be a more polarizing player than Jeff McNeil, because I think there's a large portion of this fan base that is out on him. I've done some entire shows on Jeff McNeil this offseason, and the comments are always wide-ranging from, yes, I believe Jeff McNeil is going to turn around. I've always had a soft spot for Jeff, or in the other end direction, I never want to see this guy swing a bat in a Mets uniform again. I mean, it can go either way with Jeff McNeil. I think part of that is because of the body language, how bad it gets, that it just makes you a little bit harder to root for at times. And if you're not producing and you're showing your frustrations, if a fan base is already frustrated with you, seeing you throw a little temper tantrum on the field every time you ground out, it's not going to bode well. So as we talk about what this season holds for Jeff McNeil, he's still going to get a ton of playing time. And yes, next year McNeil will be under contract and he'll probably be part of this team, because I don't know if you're going to find a trade partner for Jeff McNeil unless he has a good season. If he has a good season, you might want to keep him. But the thing about McNeil, he is going from what was once a promising, young Met. I guess he never really was a young Met when he debuted at 26, but a promising, prospect that debuted in 2018, the season where there wasn't a lot for us to get excited about. And you started to see some guys get their first taste, whether it was McNeil, Dom Smith, Ahmed Rosario. And McNeil was nowhere near as highly regarded as those other two, but he's the guy that really performed back in 2018. He got up before Pete Alonso did. And that season, let me pull up the stats real quick. Jeff McNeil hit 329 in 63 games. And it was like, man, who is this guy? You remember the Mariners desperately wanted him in the Edwin Diaz Robinson Cano trade. The Mets luckily held on to him. 2019, he's an all-star. Remember that camp? It was like, where's Jeff McNeil going to play? They got Robinson Cano to play second base. And I was like, oh, we'll try Jeff out in the outfield. And all of a sudden, he was all over the diamond. He was in left. He was in right. He was at second. Played a little bit of third, if I'm not mistaken. And he hit 318 across a full season, and he popped 23 home runs. Once he realized there was a juice baseball in the second half, he really got into his power. 2020, again hit over 300. So 3 years in a row to start his career, batted over 300. 2021, fell off the cliff. What happened? Hit 251. Oh, that was just one down year, we thought, because 2022, he goes out and wins a batting title on a 101-win team and was outstanding, was nearly a 6-win player, if memory serves, and played great defense wherever they put him. 2023, it was a really bad season. He was able to get that batting average up to 270 with a strong second half, but that was when the Mets had already completed their fire sale. He was a big reason why they weren't in position to win that year, because he was so bad in the first half. And then last year, Jose Iglesias takes his job. Second half, he ends up taking it back because he was great, but you look at the final numbers, and it's a 692 OPS and a 238 average for a guy that won a batting title 2 years ago at an average that was nearly 100 points better. So who is Jeff McNeil? If Jeff McNeil goes out this year and he is part of a great Mets team and he hits 312, and I wouldn't say he's an all-star, but he goes out and he's a steady contributor at the bottom of that lineup, but he stays on the field, and then come October, he's that tough at bat that's fouling off pitches and grinding those really high leverage at bats and maybe gets a couple huge hits. I mean, Jeff McNeil can go right back to being on that track of being remembered as a great Met. And as I talked about on that full show I did on him, whether it was last week or 2 weeks ago, you're talking about a guy that when it's all said and done, for a franchise that hasn't had a lot of homegrown talent, particularly when it comes to position players, he's one of the best position players this franchise has ever produced. Not a lot of guys have been multi-time All-Stars. And Howard Johnson, for those of you who corrected me when I did that show, I realize now, not a homegrown Met. I apologize. And Todd Hundley, I also missed on that show, homegrown Met that got a couple All-Star appearances. But Jeff McNeil, I think, was one of, I can't remember. I had to pull up those old notes so I even have them, but I think he was one of 9 or 10 Mets that have even been multi-time All-Stars as a position player, and one of the few that have ever done it as, a homegrown player. So this is a guy where if he was able this year to put together a great season and the Mets won a World Series and McNeil had some big hits along the way, he would be right back to that point of being remembered as one of the better Mets. And he should be, because ultimately, if you look at what he has done, how many guys have played 800 games in a Mets uniform that hit 289? Not many. But at one point, this was a guy that had a batting average for his career over 300. Will he get back to that point? It would take a couple really great seasons to do it. I still think he has a good year left in him. And he's going to play a big role, because even if Luis Angel Acuna ends up being your starting second baseman, Who knows what's going on in Brandon Nimmo's knee? Jeff McNeil might be your left fielder. You never know where he might get his playing time, but he's going to get in there. And he still has a pretty high ceiling because we saw it in the 40 whatever game sample it was last year in the second half, where all of a sudden Jeff McNeil was a real hitter again. So I'm excited to see what Jeff McNeil does this year. But this is sort of make or break for him, because if he has another bad year, even if he's on the roster next year, he's certainly not going to be penciled in the second base on opening day. They're going to give those opportunities to young players, and maybe injuries open up time for him, but he is going to be sort of the last man on the bench that's just a contract hanging around, sort of like we see Chris Taylor with the Dodgers, and the Mets will just be waiting to get that money off the books. He puts together 2 great seasons. Who knows? Maybe the Mets will even consider that club option. I sort of doubt it, but Jeff McNeil definitely kind of running out of chances, and certainly running out of, a leash with the fan base or running out of patience, I would say, with the fan base on being willing to support him. So those are my 3 Mets that come into this year with the most to prove, with narratives that they're going to try to change, and maybe the last chance to change those narratives. For Megill, can he establish himself as a clear-cut starting pitcher on this team that gets rotations, a spot in that rotation, wire to wire like he never has? Can Brett Baty hold his roster spot all season? Can Jeff McNeil hold off the kids and continue to be the starting second baseman for the New York Mets, or at least a key contributor on this roster that's getting everyday playing time? Those are guys that absolutely can be big, big difference makers for this team, or guys that are replaced, halfway through the season even. So we'll see how it all goes for those guys. But anyway, that's going to be all for today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.